One. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, David Strege, and here we are enjoying a double discussion, the second film we are doing on Inside Movies Galore, and it is I chose these choices for reasons, and Encino Man just so happens to be a personal favorite of mine, from 1992, directed by Les Mayfield. And let me just give a little brief intro of what IMDb says about the film. So when they find a frozen caveman in their backyard, two high school outcasts thaw him and introduce him to a modern life, while he in turn gets them to actually enjoy life. So, going on that, Dustin.
Pretty sure this was a South Park episode with the man from 1996 or whatever it was. It's like they did this,
and it was.
They did this gag, but with somebody who had only been frozen for a couple of years. I feel like it was pretty much like a straight parody of this movie.
In the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, they did basically this exact same story, except that the caveman was Fred Flintstone.
All right. Dustin, what was your first impressions of this film?
Well, I have kind of a lot of thoughts. So, well, at first, yeah, that was pretty much what I was thinking. It's like, oh yeah, this is just that South Park episode. But then after a while, I don't know, I got this weird feeling of existential dread off of it, because it's, well, if you think about it, I mean, this is a movie that could have only happened at that particular time, in that particular place, like only in the 90s, you know, like just like looking at like the attitudes and stuff that were there, like the sensibilities, the stereotypes. Like it feels very dated, but almost in like an innocent way. Like,
oh yeah, it's a product of its time. It's right up there with Wayne's World in that way.
Product of its time is a good
more
phrase. But it was just kind of like, you know, this kind of time in like American history will never come again. Like, it will never be like this, like, ever again.
Like in a good way or a bad way?
In a sad way.
Both.
Oh.
Yes.
So I don't know.
I mean,
but you could a lot of anxiety afterward.
You could say that about any like film that really embodies its time. You know, like
definitely.
Well, this not to jump in, but like this reminded me a lot of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in the same way that it was same kind of high school losers, but that was very, very 80s, and this is very early 90s specifically, but. Yeah, it kind of, they both embody their time periods very heavily.
One difference,
definitely, it was a lot of fun, and it was a really enjoyable movie. Like it genuinely was. It was just kind of like this feeling of sadness. It's like, oh, we are watching dead people.
Yes. One difference though is there is a new Bill and Ted movie coming out. I don't know if I could see a new Encino Man. It will probably happen eventually, but I just don't know.
It'd be a reboot, and then it would be all like Twitter, Instagram, you know, TikTok. Get the caveman on TikTok.
Yeah.
It would suck.
Hey, the caveman would probably be immensely popular on TikTok.
Oh,
he probably would.
Caveman would rule TikTok. Who are we kidding?
Hell, actually, no. It would start that way, except that the whole third act would be the caveman running for president and winning.
If there are any screenwriters listening.
Uh-huh.
Oh, jeez.
That's such a 90s premise too. Like, remember in the 90s when, I mean, you had movies like this, and then you also had movies like, what if like a chimpanzee, but he becomes the president? Or what if the older brother from Boy Meets World like goes on a date with the president's daughter. You know, again, only in the 90s could you have a work of art like this.
I never quite heard it described like that before.
Take that how you will.
Oh, but no, it was very nostalgic. For like, because I used to watch like the Three Ninjas movies, you know, if anyone else remembers those, and it really felt like the same. And well, what the heck is that sound in the background?
I don't know.
Die, Cubert. Well, anyway, this also kind of reminded me of the way I used to feel like watching certain movies a long time ago. With you know, I didn't grow up in like the kinds of settings that these movies took place in, but I always really wished I did. So something about it kind of tripped off like a deep feeling of sadness.
I see. Well, I mean, that honestly, that was part of the 90s aesthetic and like the image that a lot of like quote unquote 90s movies projected was this idea. It was all California, the beach, you know, surfer talk, dude. You know,
everyone lives
all
in a $1 million house.
Exactly. It was all of that, and the truth is that only was true for a very specific group of people. It just for whatever reason the media just globbed onto it, and the larger culture followed. But yeah, it never made a lot of sense to me. But then again, most people in the 70s weren't wearing platform shoes and, you know, bell bottoms and stuff necessarily. I mean, there were plenty that did, but enough to where it, you know, became the stereotype. But it's like, and you know, like you can say it about any like, you know, fashion statement or anything that gets associated with the decade. It's like, yeah, there were enough of them to where it became a thing, but it did not encompass everybody. Like, you know, like
even as a young child, bear that in mind. In the 80s, I did not necessarily wear the Dayglow neon that's associated with the 80s, at least not on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's just it's a little extreme. And like a good example is like, even if you want to go back as far as like the 50s, it's like, was everybody a greaser and looked like they came out of Greece? No. I mean, if you look at something like Brokeback Mountain, which I think it starts off in the 50s, like the way that those people are dressed, they look like they could be walking around now. You know, it's like, it's just good old fashioned like blue jeans and, you know, plaid shirts and stuff. And it's like, well, that's pretty timeless. But you know, it's the difference between like looking at things through like what we would now call a nostalgic lens, but at that time it was current. You know, it's like it's trying to appeal to what are the kids into and how can we speak to them and blah blah blah, and then that becomes ingrained in the audience who watches it, and then you know, years later they say, oh, I'm nostalgic for this, and it just kind of feeds itself, as opposed to the reality is that, well, okay, yeah, there were enough people that were like that, but for the most part, people kind of sort of dressed like they did in every other year. But that's specifically with fashion. Obviously, technology, that changes pretty fast. But, you know, it's just an interesting, nostalgia is a very interesting thing because it is very illusory and it is very subjective, and not a whole lot of it is based in anything actually real, except when it comes to, like, yeah, there's fashion trends, there's technological changes, but it is still very much a state of mind rather than something that actually exists.
Actually, that I think what I was trying to say earlier was nostalgia for the way we hope we wanted things to be.
Right.
Well, like, you mean like relative peacetime?
I think every high schooler in the 90s
just to kind of, I mean, I was very young in the 90s, so like my childhood was in the 90s, not I wasn't I was like,
But I do
Three.
think every high schooler in the '90s wished they could just go out in the yard and build a pool.
Oh yeah.
That
actually,
didn't
yeah. I mean, if
happen,
I
but
saw this in the
everyone wished they
'90s,
could. Yeah,
if I saw this in the '90s when I was a kid, I would be like, yeah, that's how you put a pool in. You just dig a hole.
exactly.
I did try to dig a hole. I
Yes.
was 5. Fuck off.
Actually,
So,
I am probably the only one here who saw this when it came out at as close as it could be to the particular age that one should be when watching the film. I was about 13ish when it came out, and this film being the debut of Pauly Shore, I didn't know better.
Was this his debut?
Or at least
Yeah.
it was
Apparently, he's so young, I almost didn't recognize him. But then he talked, and it was like, oh,
Yeah.
all right.
Apparently, it was
24.
also Rose McGowan's movie debut.
I wondered if that was her.
Yeah, she was
Well,
in
well,
there.
she was in Biodome as well, which Pauly Shore would never do.
Biodome also had Pauly Shore.
Something
Yes.
about trouble
Yes,
in
it
the
did.
bubble.
Well,
Yeah.
it's and then the weird
Sure.
thing is
Great
like,
Futurama. That's a great Futurama line. You should
Yeah, I
cause
know.
some trouble in that bubble. If
rest
it rhymes, I
assured,
can cause
if it
trouble
rhymes,
in
I can
it.
cause trouble in it. Well, yeah, and that was really Pauly Shore's voice too. When the thing that I find interesting is because this was the first time watch for me, but like I knew about people's hatred for Pauly Shore, but I never really grew up with him, which is probably just as well. But the thing that I noticed when watching this was that his speech patterns were pretty much exactly replicated in a Goofy movie, which a Goofy movie, let me tell you, talk about 90s. Holy shit.
Oh yeah.
Was this your first
Oh,
time
yeah.
watching it, Dane?
Yeah, it was. It's
We should do that someday.
we should. Except a Goofy
Ride.
movie. A Goofy movie is that's a good movie, surprisingly. But it's yeah, this was a first time watch for me. I had first heard of the movie actually in an advertisement in a 1992, I want to say like Spider-Man comic or some other Marvel comic that I had gotten it like I think it was one of those like antique shop kind of things, where you find old comics. I saw that. I love the old ads in comics, especially like early 90s ones, but yeah, I first heard about it there, but I never really had any interest in seeing it, to be honest.
Oh.
I really didn't. But and I saw it for this, and it was one of those things where I could see why in the ads why they said if you liked Wayne's World, you like this, because it did have a very Wayne's World-y feel to it. Except like if you crossed Wayne's World with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, I think you'd get this. And I don't think it's as good as either one of those, especially not as good as Wayne's World, because Wayne's World was really smart. And this is more just kind of this is more just kind of silly, dumb fun. But as far as that goes, it's definitely serviceable on that level. I can see why that film alone would have been more than enough reason to cast Brendan Fraser as George of the Jungle, because it's like, yeah, you can very clearly see the genesis there. Now,
Another film I can't bring myself to watch.
It was funny.
I was making the joke to myself that this was Brendan Fraser's actual origin story.
Something like that. Well, no, I did grow up with George of the Jungle. I think I actually saw that in the theater when I was like 5 or something like that.
I think I might have too.
Yeah, and let me tell you, well, and that's a movie. Let me tell you, George of the Jungle, it holds up. Like it's surprisingly really smart and like really witty.
Laugh.
Ready? Yeah. There's so much like it's so like it's so like dumb, but it's so brilliant in its dumbness. Like they know exactly what they're doing, and they do, I think, some of the funniest fourth wall breaking I've ever seen in a movie. So yeah, it holds up. But yeah, I could see why Brendan Fraser, why he got that role, because his role here is very similar. And he definitely does look cavemanish, but still, handsome, enough to where he could be a heartthrob of his time, which he was. And
Yeah.
it definitely hits all the beats you'd want from a movie like this. I don't think it's great, but I think it definitely hits. It hits what you would want it to hit. I don't think it's deserving of like the whatever, like 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, but at the same time, I don't really give Rotten Tomatoes any thought anymore. But yeah,
Throw some darts at a board, and you'll get the Rotten Tomatoes.
pretty
I
much,
mean,
yeah.
Yeah, I
See-
mean, as a teen in the early '90s, these films were very, very common. It was that whole idea of like some teens stumble upon something there. You have some of the '80s with that, with Weird Science.
Yeah.
Curly's
This is
gold.
a
or whatever.
carry on.
The fact that
From
Sean Astin's name in here was David, he really was me when I was. Swear to God, because he literally acted exactly like I acted when I was a kid.
Oh man, I'm so sorry.
And I had
Actually,
a friend almost exactly like him, except he was really tall, and he was kind of a weirdo. So I can relate to Pauly Shore's character somewhat.
We can all relate to being weirdos.
Which you know what's funny?
I'm still a weirdo.
You know what's funny is actually back when I used to watch the Nostalgia Critic, which I don't anymore, and that's a whole separate side rant about how fucking horrible and corrupt Channel Awesome is. But anyway, when I did watch him when I was younger, he did a review of Biodome, and he said something that I thought was rather insightful because I'd never heard it put this way before. But he basically said that Pauly Shore is to white people what Jar Jar Binks is to black people.
Wow. That's bad.
Which I thought that
I'll
was
admit-
kind of funny.
Yeah.
I did like him in Phantom of the Mall.
Phantom of the Mall. What? It's just occurred to me. I don't really know Pauly Shore movies.
Neither do I.
You're
I'm not
lucky.
sure I could say I know them either. I feel like Brandon showed me Biodome. You did, right? Am I remembering
I have.
correctly?
I grew up in that time period. I was in that. I was the target demographic back when it was back in the heyday of Pauly Shore. All of the god awful number of films that he was in. And
Timmy and T-Rex, I think was supposed to be like this, wasn't it?
See, I'm coming from this a little different in that I feel like I probably saw bits of this back in the day. I probably saw part of it on TV once, or maybe someone was watching it. I knew it by name and reputation because, yes, Pauly Shore had a reputation even back then. It was like he had 2 or 3 years where he was on top, and then it was, oh God, Pauly Shore, and it was like,
Pauly Shore is
he was
dead.
kind of like the Dane Cook of his day, wasn't he?
Well,
He had like that really.
I don't think
the same
Dane,
character and everything, and you can only kind of handle so much of it before you get
I
sick
don't
of
think
it.
Dane Cook was ever as ubiquitous as Pauly Shore, though.
It
But I
was
know
just
a little
the
bit like
saturation of the market.
Well, Dane Cook, he
well, he's in
had like
he's in everything.
yeah, but
he
he
wasn't
had
like-
he had a
didn't have the name
meteoric.
recognition.
Well, I would disagree with that. He had a meteoric rise to fame very quickly thanks to MySpace. And like people of my generation, like I was like middle school age at the time that he was really big. And my older brother, he was like early high school age. And let me tell you, his stand-up, it influenced it. Like people would not only reference the bits, but like certain things about it became so commonplace that it just entered the lexicon, like the friend that nobody likes and things like that. They just entered the lexicon, like they were that ingrained in. Yeah, but it's like they were that ingrained in our just vernacular. And then once some of his movies, once they didn't do especially well, then that's when his star faded really fast. And I think that's part of why, like, I would compare him to Pauly Shore, even though I do like Dane Cook quite a bit. I get why people don't, and I don't put anything against them if they don't like him. I think it's partially because us Danes got to stick together, but also
Code of Danes.
exactly.
He also tends to play a little bit more of a jerk kind of character.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've seen a few of his movies. My youngest brother's a big fan, and so I definitely saw some of his stuff. And
I liked Employee of the Month. Like that was actually
a pretty good one. And of course, Waiting was thoroughly underrated.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked as a waiter. Waiting was a lot better than the critics said it was.
Oh, hey, real quick, I forgot the most important part of first impressions. So I first heard about this movie 6-7 hours ago when I found out it was tonight's movie.
You first heard of it then?
Yeah, it had been completely off my radar as a thing. Like, I knew South Park was parodying something when I saw that so many years ago, but I had no idea what until today when it clicked and it was like,
I was introduced through comic books because they advertised
Me too.
the heck out of it in comics.
See, that's what I'm saying. Like, this was ubiquitous back in the day. I just don't know that I ever really saw it. The first time I know for sure I watched it was last night. I watched the whole thing.
When I brought this movie up for Caveman Month, I remember you saying, Dustin, what the hell is that?
So there, Dustin, you did hear about it, but
well,
you blocked it from your memory. But I do want to say that watching it, you guys have already hit on this point quite a bit, but I definitely came away with it. Well, that is a movie that's a product of its time. It screams early 90s in both good and bad ways. And there's definitely an element of nostalgia. And even then, it trafficked on nostalgia even then. I saw a bit on IMDb that said that, what's his name? Sean Astin for one, but Ke Huy Quan, the two of them co-starred in Goonies, and IMDb says that this is the first and only time that two of the cast members of Goonies have shared a scene together since then. That's really strange, first of all, but that's definitely playing on nostalgia. And especially since Quan was I think he was basically out of acting not really, but mostly out of acting by this point.
Yeah. He had a short stint because he was cast as Short Round in Temple of Doom, and then
talk about your racist typecasting, but it was a fun character. But
I will defend Short Round because I will defend Short Round like crazy.
He was a fun character. It's just you watch it now and you're like, oh my god, what were they thinking?
They might have laid it on a little thick, but at the same time, like, he's a street kid who, he's lucky that he knows any English at all, and it's like,
he's so much more entertaining than the female lead in that.
Yes,
film.
most definitely.
There's been a couple of those sort of outdated moments, but they weren't like quite too egregious. Like there was the guys in the bar, and that was kind of like you let it go real quick. And then there
were a couple where you had the two high schoolers who were trying to rapping, and then the caveman comes in and he gets it right away, and I'm like, oh my god, that doesn't feel right. There were a couple moments like that, but one of the things that dated it the most
had to be there.
was also one of the things that dated it the most, but also was kind of fascinating for me, was the jerk boyfriend Matt. Played by Michael DeLuise, who of course is the son of Dom DeLuise and the younger brother of Peter DeLuise. And of course, Peter starred in 21 Jump Street before he decided he wanted to be a director. And they basically brought Michael in to kind of replace him and also Johnny Depp. And so for one full season of Jump Street, he was one of the main cast, or half a season. But just that association with Jump Street is the main thing I know him from. And I'm like, well, that really dates it.
Well, there's also where he drops the F-bomb, like not the good F-bomb, the bad F-bomb. But I think that was one of my favorite moments. I think that was one of my favorite parts of the movie because he immediately gets his ass kicked. Like, kaboom! Like he says it. Pow!
He gets his ass kicked a couple times, and that's lovely.
I mean, he is actually, you know who he reminded me of was the villain in Revenge of the Nerds. That kind of bully that was beyond the ogre nerds or like the overstrong jock character, but the guy who was actually almost smarmy and charismatic in his own way when he did his bullying. He did have that, like, I'm a strong person and I'm going to use my strength, but he also had that weird personality about him that was more than kind of the 2D bullies.
You could almost see his two minions as just like nerd.
Yeah, well, I like that he like he was a prototypical bully character, but like you said, the way that he's played, he has a teensy bit more of a sway to him than others might, and particularly it's because, like, I think he has some of the more memorable lines, like, I wouldn't piss on your gums if your teeth were on fire, and it's like, you know, it's like, what the fuck does that even mean? That's right up there with Biff.
Actually, he said she wouldn't piss on your gums, and I was like,
yes, she would.
Well, but
it's a different kink than we're used to.
Oh yeah, well, but that was right up there with Biff Tannen's "Make Like a Tree and Get Out of Here."
Get out of here.
Exactly.
But like that's what I mean. It's like you can do bully characters, but it's more so about giving them a little bit more personality, and I think that he did that. And then, well, my I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but my favorite scene was, I think my favorite scene was towards the end when he does. It's the cliched, the big reveal, the character with superpowers gets revealed in front of everybody, or the big secret comes out, and then everybody's like,
man.
Yeah, like that was. I thought that was a great way to just turn.
Oh my god, his reaction too. No.
Yeah, his reaction to that was just like his reaction, but also just the way that they turned the cliche on its head. Like that was really well done. Like I don't think it's got like the smartest writing in the world, but like it's nowhere near the dumbest. And also like that was a notable good way to reverse that cliche. And now talking about
also, like you were saying about his charisma, and the whole thing of that was one of his strong points, and then to show in that moment that people just weren't listening to him anymore.
Oh yeah, well his power faded because the caveman caught on surprisingly quickly, which, I mean, you could easily read into it like a little bit more of like a little this is probably giving it a little too much credit, but you could read in some aspects of social satire in the sense that a caveman, this animalistic primitive human, is able to adapt to the 90s youth culture pretty quickly. It's like it's kind of like Beavis and Butthead in that respect, that it's sort of like a tribute to teenagers, but it's also like making fun of them at the same time. And in that respect, it's like you could probably read into it like that, because he does adapt to their world pretty quickly. And part of it is because Brendan Fraser, like I think one of his best talents is that he was at that time, not so much anymore, but like at that time, he was a very, like, obviously very good looking guy, but he had that right amount of just kind of lovable dumbness about him. I think that was what really gave him his charm back in the day. And he in this film, like he definitely has that, likable, someone who's not.
You didn't have to say much, you know.
No,
I
he
mean,
didn't. He
Right.
did tremendous. He did tremendous emotion, emoting with his face and the few noises and things that he did make. Which I give him all the, as a student of silent film and minimalism and all that. I gave him all the credit in the world for that, because he did convey a very clear character, and he wasn't just reactionary. Like you got the sense that this is somebody who he likes socialization. He likes to go with the flow. He,
Oh
I
you know,
compare that museum scene where he starts to see everything to that scene in Ice Age where Manny is looking at the cave paintings.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that, or like in Planet of the Apes when Taylor goes and sees the humans in the museum. Like I got a sense of that too, but it's he's a very clear character in that he does like socialization. He likes all these new exciting things, and he's not like the standard, like he's scared of everything. Like he has a little bit of that in the early days, but for the most part it goes away relatively quickly, and it's replaced by, oh, I can get down with this, like with the TV. Like,
Right.
yeah.
he didn't want to like destroy it outright, but he like he got the sense of the music. He got into it pretty quite quick. He is a very musical character, which I mean that also primitive humans did develop music surprisingly quickly relative to other things, and so music is quite old in that respect. So I could definitely buy that. Um, as far as which I guess like what was said before was the idea of, oh, he picks up on the hip hop dancing really fast, which
Oh yeah.
I think that that's partially because, well, music in and of itself is so universal, and
Universal.
it's so universal, and it's older than recorded history. But that leads into the question of, well, connotations and things that may or may not have aged well, which I got more of a sense of, well, again, it's very of its time, but like I think the alcohol to the teenager thing, that wouldn't work today, especially well, that wouldn't work, as well as like the fact that the girls in here are just there to be acquired or won by the boys, and the fact that, like,
90s.
if, well, and like if and it's a double
And
edged
like
thing.
the character that Robin Tunney plays,
Yeah,
basically, she's the best friend character who's really a total bitch to the two main dudes. But then she sees that caveman, and she's all about it.
Well, and something that wouldn't really work this same way today is when he sees her and he goes for her, and she, well, immediately does respond to his being
Right,
like assertive and forward. Which, okay, to be fair, that's still men who are maybe they don't like go quite that far with it, but like men who
right,
do have an assertiveness to them, that can still
yeah,
be a turn on for a woman. But like if you tried to do that same thing in that same way today, like people would immediately go rape, or sexual
right,
assault or whatever.
Mm.
And it's like it's like the way, it's a very delicate line to make sure that you're not, crossing or whatever. And that's why I say it's very context dependent, and you'd have to be really careful with how you did a scene like that today.
I love how Robin Tooney's character, when she like makes a noise in the classroom, and the teachers like, that that these cavemen are not. If you actually dated a cave man, they would be a hell of a lot more violent. And she's like, "Ooh,
Hmm.
sexy," or something like that.
Well, again,
Well,
it's all different things. If you're looking at it, it's all about different because the culture of the 90s was special in its own way, and it was. But again, it's all different. I mean, just like today's culture would find I mean, I'm sure the kids of the '90s would look at like the kids of today and like, what the heck is going on with them?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Just that,
it's a weird thing. Times change, but like, and
Mhm.
I still think that like you could do the same basic thing of a primitive man wanting to get his woman and her one of them like maybe liking the fact that this guy is more assertive than other guys. You don't just have to establish that maybe the other boys that she's interacting with are too like mamby pamby, and maybe that is what's turning her off or whatever. So that way, once you've established that, then there's enough contrast to where you get, okay, I see why this person would go for this other person.
This would be a good. This would be a good thing to ask Katie about.
Yeah, well, it just
Yeah.
because the reason I say that is because like we this last decade was the one that gave us 50 Shades of Grey, which is a very extreme. Well, that's a very extreme, like unhealthy relationship, and yet the essential appeal of it was that you had this guy with a lot of power and sway who was acting upon this person, and that apparently, I guess I never read him, but like that was apparently part of the appeal. And so it's like you don't have to go that destructive with it. You just take the basic motivation of somebody that likes their their man in this case to have a little bit more initiative, and you just set up that sufficient contrast, and that'll make it land better, as opposed to the idea that, oh, if you're just really aggressive, the woman will automatically go for it. It's like, well, no, that's the part that I was getting
That's
at.
a good way to get in a lot of trouble.
That's what I mean. It's
Yeah.
like that, setting it up that way, it wouldn't work today. So you'd have to do a lot more work on the front end to make it work today.
Mhm.
I mean, there's an actual movie out recently called 365 that's even worse than 50 Shades of Grey, but it's also very popular with people who would have considered that sort of thing a terrible thing, which was it's about this gangster, this leader of this, and he basically kidnaps this girl and forces her into servitude until she ends up loving him. And this is
Mhm.
extremely popular with the same crowd that would technically be offended by this. So again, it's all relative to what you're watching.
Well, and it's dependent on like
Again,
and it depends on like, are they controlling the experience of consuming this media? Because there's part of why that kind of narrative tends to be popular in books, because books are obviously very active, and you're choosing to read those, and you're helping to kind of guide the experience, whereas movies are
Mhm.
a little bit more passive in terms of how they act. You lose yourself in the experience, or at least that's what that's what is sold to
Right.
you. No, but again, it's like it's also what particular kinks might turn someone on, and of course the difference between fantasy and reality, because there are a lot of people that are really turned on by certain fantasies, but if you try to do it in real life, more than likely it wouldn't really work.
Anyway,
oh yeah.
back to uh, woo, that was an adventure.
It always is.
Encino Man. So what we have is a couple. Well, did we even start with
Basically, after they dig up. We haven't really touched on like that intro where we see the caveman and his partner like buried in the ice.
Mhm.
And they just
Right.
kind of dig it. They just kind of dig him up when they're digging that big hole for the pool.
Yeah.
Well, you do have another long-standing cliche where you have the teacher who happens to be teaching a relevant subject, and they're talking about like Cro-Magnon Man and all that stuff, and earthquakes and glaciers under the surface and all that stuff.
Yeah, trying
And then they dig 'em up.
to get at that exposition so bad.
Yeah.
Like having to
yeah.
establish what permafrost is and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just have to interject that I cannot think about Glacier now without hearing David Attenborough call it glaciers. I cannot do that.
And then he found the mosquito in the amber.
Right.
That was Richard Attenborough, but yeah. Like if you ever watch those BBC Earth, they're great productions, but David Attenborough has some interesting pronunciations.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's just being British.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Weird.
So who digs a pool like that? Who actually
Somebody who doesn't
I
know
do
how
what
to
I'm-
shovel?
somebody who
I'm
doesn't know how to dig a pool.
You got to give Sean Astin credit. That was some back-breaking work to get a hole that big and that deep.
Now,
Oh yeah.
That is, it is one hell of a hole.
on Sean Astin's character,
It didn't seem to be a plan that was told by its parents that you must get this hole dug. It was,
something tells me that this plan
Okay.
might have not been thought through.
He probably didn't clear it with the city.
Yeah. No, it didn't get contractors lined up.
he suddenly had a pool by graduation. Hey,
Yeah.
What was that movie? The animated movie, like Meet the gosh, I can't think of what, where they've got the T-Rex under control. It's like I can't reach them. I've got a big head and tiny little arms.
Meet the Robinsons.
The Robinsons are like, I don't think that this plan was properly thought through. And this is like a regular theme.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, I think is the
Yeah. Which now, to be fair, in high school, you could be shooting up heroin or you could be digging a
Right.
hole. Like which of the two, I'd go with digging a hole.
It's clearly a
personally.
binary choice. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah,
Those are the-
clearly it's
Yeah.
one or the other. You can't do both at the same time.
So it makes you wonder how many of his classmates are shooting up and how many of them have big holes in the backyard.
So
Or they just have big holes in general, if you know what I mean.
gross.
was it me or was Sean Astin's character? He was meant to be this character that we all identify with, but to
Right.
me, he was one of the most unlikable characters in the film.
He was
Oh,
kind of,
wow.
he was kind of a jerk. Like he was far too worried about things and trying to have
And-
things play out in a certain way.
Yeah.
And
But you can't. I can
just needed-
identify with him. That doesn't mean I really liked him all that much.
Well,
but I
that's the
can
thing, though.
identify-
It's about when you watch it, because I remember originally watching it and really identifying with and liking the character, but I was 14 at the time.
Yeah.
And at 14, you are egocentric. You are
Yeah.
you're learning to think between abstract and concrete thought processes. So again, it makes sense that you're sitting there and you're identifying with this guy, but I'm looking at him now, I was like, this guy is selfish as hell.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
when
like, Pauly Shore looks like he's more selfless than this guy, and that's
Mhm.
sad.
that is saying a lot. Which I mean, that's like a movie that I saw when I was 15 in the theater. It was like the only time that I can think of that I was like the exact right intended demographic for this film. Like it was like kind of dead on the money. In fact, at that time I was 15 years old, and it was the first Transformers, because that hit the whole, like, want to get a car, want to get a hot girlfriend, want to have freedom, all that kind of stuff like that. Definitely, like, that's Sam Witwicky's driving motivation in the first one. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and
when I think-
that being said, a lot of teenagers are like that. So
When
Yeah,
I
I would-
think the first Transformers, I think the 1986 movie,
yeah,
which actually was the first film I saw in theaters, and I think I was the target demographic then.
well, I was the target demographic for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie when that came out, and talk about 90s. Holy shit!
Yeah. I still haven't seen the movie, but God, I remember the series.
Well, the movie is just as 90s as the show, let me tell you. And I mean that with all affection, because I was like 3 or 4 when I saw it, and I ate it up, and and I still eat it up because that is nostalgic. But I fully acknowledge that it is as dumb as all get out, but that's why it's great.
Now, we have seen Robin Tooney as an actress in one other film on the show, and that was The Craft.
I
What do you-
really wish I caught that episode. I was so annoyed. Oh,
What?
well.
That being said, what do you guys think of this character that she's playing against that character, those that were on the show?
Well, I wasn't on that episode, so I can't say.
She
Brandon?
was.
Yeah, who was?
I need
What
I need a
movie?
bit of a refresher. She was the good girl, right?
Yeah, she was the good girl, but she
Yeah.
didn't have powers.
Yeah. Guess kind of an interesting characterization there. Well, in my defense, The Craft has 4 kind of villains and one.
I wasn't on for
not.
that episode either.
Yeah. No. We need to do Empire Records one of these days.
Oh, that was a good film. Yeah.
Talk about her films. Yeah. But yeah, I vaguely
Yeah.
remember The Craft. I really wanted to see it again, which is why I didn't make the show because I couldn't see it again. But yeah, she was more of a good girl character. This one, she's more like the slutty best friend, basically.
Well,
Yeah.
the reason why I say that is because I actually watched her
Nice.
on the show The Mentalist,
Ah.
and she plays like a detective character where she's kind of somewhat mostly a straight edge, or tries to be. She cannot entirely be around Patrick Jane very long, along with a straight face. But that being said, I thought it was very different. Me actually recognizing her this young, because I remember her as a much later character. So, but in any case, is there anything else that anyone wants to mention about this film?
Well, we've hardly touched on like a lot of the fun stuff. Like there are so many. This movie is almost like a montage of just like fun scenes. Like they take
Yeah.
they clean him up. They put him in like their clothes. Like it has a very
Well, first they put the ice cube in the
tool shed.
garage with all these space heaters around it, and then just go to school. And then
and leave it to catch fire to like burn the
moment.
whole house down.
Well, yeah, I like that moment where Sean Astin goes in there and he sees all the water on the floor and there's nothing left. And for a minute, you think he believes that he melted the whole thing. That was great.
And then, of course, his reaction to the house with Pauly Shore. When they see the hands and the face print on the window, everything is just trashed, and then all of a sudden, the smoke alarm goes off.
Because he's trying to build a fire.
And there was a fun
Just like
callback
that
too when
story.
at the end of the movie when you find out that his girlfriend survived too.
That was a very interesting sequence too, because they showed like the whole earthquake sequence, and then all of a sudden, it's like they were trying to slightly bring about.
I liked how the earthquake served sort of a narrative purpose, and that it's like, oh, that's how their ice blocks got close enough to the surface for them to be unearthed.
Yeah, that was a good way to do like a dream sequence, but also a flashback kind of all in one.
Oh yeah, I think so. It was kind of cool just to see how it all came together at the end.
And I didn't expect his girlfriend to get thawed out. I expected him to get one of the high school girls, but I am glad that she did get thawed out because that just it felt right, you know.
Right.
I was pretty happy with that too.
Well, and
'Cause
she was a babe once they cleaned her all up.
I sort of expected them to do it, and it was like, oh yeah, good for them.
Of course, it was one of those things where he kind of set up a sequel that never was. You know, that's what. Not that there needed to be one, but it really kind of felt like it could have been.
There was actually a sequel. Believe it or not, it was a
There
made-for-TV.
was.
Because
Okay, I must have missed that.
the writer had actually made a made-for-TV movie. I don't know much about it, but I looked up the writer behind this a little bit before, and she is also the screenplay writer for Son-in-Law, which also
good God.
Pauly
So was that the sequel?
But evidently, it was a made-for-TV movie.
It would be.
And it was called Encino Woman.
Oh, actually, I think I did hear about that.
Well, and the director, Les Mayfield, he went on to direct a movie that I remembered seeing in theaters very clearly, which was Flubber.
Oh,
and
Brandon, you'd like this. The sequel starred Bobcat Goldthwait.
Oh,
well, I have to see it now. It's like
it has a 2.8 rating
there.
on IMDb.
Yeah. But I saw Flubber in theaters when I was 5, and I remembered it very clearly. And you know, that was another one that, like, it's one of those ones that doesn't. I loved it when I was a kid, and then you get older and you're like, yeah, this doesn't really hold up. And like, I don't hate it now or anything, but it's like, yeah, it was definitely made for little kids, pretty much.
Yeah, the writer of the screenplay for this, her name was Sean Sheps, and it surprised me that it was a female that actually wrote the story, which is actually kind of cool, to be honest. Told written from a female perspective, so that was kind of interesting.
That might also explain why, like, the female characters in this weren't. We made them sound kind of thin, but they had personality to them.
They did.
Yeah, it wasn't their movie, but at the same time, like, you could have done a lot worse in that department. Well, and plus the interactions between the three guys, they, you know, like, the caveman is into girls, obviously, because, well, you know, he's a primitive man, and you know, the teenage boys, yeah, they want to get the girls, but it isn't anywhere near as like flat out crude as you might get in a modern movie these days. And you get the sense that these are three guys who talk about deeper things than that, like more about, like, their aspirations and stuff. And, like, you know, that's something that you will often get more of in you know, female writer movies that are either dramas or comedies that are kind of interpersonal in some way or another. And then with a lot of, like, more guy-centric comedies, it'll be more of, like, the raunchy shenanigans, like a Bachelor Party or The Hangover or something like that. And there's a little bit less sharing of hopes and dreams and stuff. Now, again, there are variances within all those things, but by and large, that's what you see. And I do feel like that was an element of this that definitely stood out relative to others of its type. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't, certain things, like, if you were to do that today, I think the females would be more fleshed out. But at the same time, it wasn't their movie, number one, but also it was a product of its time. But I do think that you could have done a lot worse in that department.
Yeah,
easily.
If I was to look at this, I really don't think that these type of comedy movies are no longer relevant to this day and age. I just think that they've evolved because there are plenty of similar comedies. I mean, shoot, look at Bridesmaids. Bridesmaids was just as raunchy, just as Ghostbusters 2016. That comedy was about on the same level as Encino Man when it came to the humor. I would almost say Encino Man was more intelligent, but that tells you in a lot of ways that, yeah, it's not necessarily dead, but I think a lot of it was utilized it's just like this one built upon things like Weekend at Bernie's or others of its time. I think that ones like
Yeah,
Bridesmaids
the time when everyone lived in a $1 million house.
Yeah.
in California, and
Oh.
that was the only state that existed.
In all fairness, though,
don't
Weekend
forget
at Bernie's,
that
they lived in a crap hole.
No,
So.
in fairness, this is the same year the Home Alone came out, and they lived in $1 million house in Chicago.
Yeah.
Oh, God,
They lived in
yeah,
like a
that's-
$4 million house in Chicago. Who are you kidding? That thing had
That was-
10 rooms, if not more.
Yeah, that was like several houses all in one.
That's true.
It was like a legit mansion. Like, this is like a really nice, like, upper middle class home in this
Right.
one,
But
in
given
Home
the
Alone,
property,
God
given
damn.
the zip code, it was probably still $1 million or better.
Are they both CEOs or something?
Or even
Right.
National Lampoons. That was pretty impressive if you think about it.
Well, and actually, along those lines, like when the parents get home and they see the place totally trashed, he's like, "Well, I thought I would try to make dinner for y'all." It's like, what the hell does this guy do to make dinner? And the parents are cool with that explanation.
And
It's
If I was a
yeah, this is
5-year-old,
an exchange
maybe.
student. This is an exchange
Yeah.
student. Don't you remember the conversation we had?
you know, I
Do you
think
just not
maybe
pay
he
attention
did.
to me?
In
Yeah,
19
I remember. Sure.
In
Oh yeah, we're bad parents. I just remembered that. Oh crap.
Yeah,
In
lucky
They
good
were bad parents, honestly. Like, I got
They
the vibe
were.
that they don't really pay attention to them. Like,
Right.
eh.
And actually, I'm trying to remember what I know Richard Mazur from something. I'm trying to remember what he's the father. Let's see here.
So
Richard
in
Mazur.
1992, these were the highest grossing films of 1992.
Oh, he was bored to death. That was a good show.
Aladdin.
No.
Aladdin
And
was in
this?
1992.
Well, you see though,
Yeah.
and Pauly Shore was this actually was Pauly Shore's key to fame.
Pretty much.
Again, it was that obsession with these characters who were really cool at the time, but as everybody knows, and it was a fad, and he was a fad. I mean, look at his fashion and all that. That just it says that he's a fad, and fads change very
Mhm.
quickly. So it didn't last very long.
No.
But it was the high point of cool at the time.
hmm
And I remember that because in high school that was the thing, that was and
I
to me it was
loved his,
an okay movie.
did. I loved his weasel thing that he did. That was kind of.
The weasel. Buddy.
Yeah.
Oh, like that coda to the end, buddy. It's like, what? It took me a minute to remember. Oh, right, that was his thing.
Yeah.
And I felt the scene at the museum was kind of poignant. Like, it was a lot more heartfelt than I would have expected from this movie.
Mhm.
Because he's kind of realizing, oh, everyone I know is dead.
Mhm.
If anyone hasn't seen it,
seen them in real life. So
if anybody hasn't seen it, they should watch Pauly Shore is Dead. It kind of
Mhm.
is a reflection on the character and his current reality is reflection of times that he was popular.
Is he like really miserable now, or?
Well, the premise of the movie is that he fakes his death in order to gain popularity and relevance again.
Oh,
And it's actually a pretty fun movie. I think you watched it with me, didn't you, Jake?
I don't think so. I want to see it. I
No,
don't
you
think I-
did watch it with me because I know I
Are you
showed that
sure?
to you. Yeah, we picked it up at Movie
Because
Stop.
if you did,
and we
it
watched
made
it
no.
together.
If we saw it together, it made no impact on me.
Yeah, well, it was a Pauly Shore movie.
for some reason,
I
I'm
know.
thinking Pauly Shore is BoJack Horseman. I
Yeah.
think that's his life now.
I wonder if he was ever on that.
He would have had to have been, right?
You would think so.
He's like
Let's-
perfect for it.
He would
It's too
be.
bad he's
Sorry,
got a
Pauly Shore.
reputation as as being like a total jerk to most fans, which is a sad thing.
Oh, apparently he has a appearance as the character Johnny Blowhole in your favorite series, Brandon, Star versus the Forces of Evil.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Blowhole.
Let's see,
Yeah,
but no,
that's
apparently he's
that's
not
a different Blowhole's a different movie for people who have particularly big holes.
He did have some appearances as himself on Entourage, which makes sense.
He, he
Yeah.
was a voice in Casper: A Spirited Beginning, and he was a voice in Casper Meets Wendy. So,
Yeah.
and
he
had
played himself on Futurama.
Well,
He played
you know,
himself on Futurama, but on Futurama, he was a total jerk.
Yeah.
Which, well,
Oh, and there we go. A Goofy movie.
like Bruce
Oh,
Campbell.
yeah.
It's like Bruce Campbell in My Name is Bruce. Like,
Yeah.
he's just that guy in real life, unfortunately.
Oh, and I mentioned earlier 21 Jump Street. Pauly Shore's first credited role was on 21 Jump Street.
Yep.
Well,
No,
though, it's
Sorry, Bruce
Encino
Campbell.
Man
You know,
is worth having in a collection just for the fact that it is important that it kicked off that
Mhm.
level of film. It,
Mhm.
it is an important film in that perspective because those Bruce Campbell, those Pauly Shore films were a thing. It was a phenomenon
Mhm.
of the 90s. And it just is, and even today, those aftershocks can be felt. And all the aftershocks originated with Encino Man.
All right.
yeah,
After-
this was a fun movie too. Like, I'm really happy you guys got me to watch this because I almost skipped tonight because I was feeling kind of eh.
It's relatively enjoyable. That's the strange thing about it.
It is.
I think it's just straight up enjoyable. I don't think I would put any real caveats on it aside from, if you're maybe sensitive to the 3-letter F word. Like, they drop it near the end just once, but the guy does immediately get his ass beat, so I would fully recommend it.
And
I laughed so hard. I loved it.
I specifically always remember the staple to the wall scene.
Oh,
Some reason.
that was just a nasty move.
That was just classic because I've seen it happen in my own high school.
Oh, wow.
Not that I had anything to do with it, but
Well,
I've seen it happen.
Okay.
well, again, it's a staple of those times. If you watch
So to
any
speak.
90s or 80s actually, if you watch any comedy up until like a certain point in time, and I'm talking like mid 2010s, because even especially in the early 2000s, you've gotta expect that it's going to be something offensive. It's just as it is. Actually, in the early
True.
2000s, they worked literally hard to offend you in the early 2000s. That was the
Yeah.
time of,
Just
True.
with it
if
being,
it's offensive, we need to go there.
with it being Pride Month, I figured I'd just, give some advance warning in case people wanted to check it out, but we're,
Yeah,
sensitive.
you gotta
Hmm.
you gotta project back to the time.
Yeah, and
It's
for
as
the
simple as
time,
that.
it was pretty friendly.
Yeah, you could have done a whole lot worse. That's for
Oh,
sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Alrighty. Favorite scenes. Starting with you, Dustin.
Why do we have to start with me? It's hard to pick just one.
You can say
Start
more
with
than
Dane. You're on the spot now, Dane. Go.
Oh well, I already said which was the part where he says he's a caveman. Yay! That was just a good upending of that cliche.
No.
Well,
It's hard not to pick that.
okay. Actually, I do have one. If you want one, it's one that we hadn't mentioned, which was in the bar scene, where you had the guy who was like, "Don't you see this? Don't you dare put your eyes on my girl." And then when he's speaking he's speaking in Spanish, like she's like it's like moldy cheese and all this It's like, yeah, you're right. And then she smacks him in the face. Then he's sobbing and crying to his friend in the corner.
I didn't think you'd wake up with me. Ah.
Yeah, that was pretty fun.
I'll have to say that my favorite, one of my favorite moments is it's in that same area where the one Spanish guy he goes Polly and what's his name, and Sean Astin, and he's like, hey, you see that woman over there? Do not touch her. She's my girl, Holmes. And then you can see Brandon Fraser eyeing her up, and then he takes her away.
He's like picks her up and carries her off.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
like-
uh-oh. And then they're like dancing like in the conga line together, and it's like, oh, it's okay.
Actually, you know what's weird is that scene. You think of that scene, you think to yourself that should be kind of offensive in one way or the other, stereotype wise. But in a way, it was kind of fun, and it didn't. I didn't consider it necessarily offensive because they were all friends by the end of it.
Right.
They just the Spanish guys drove them home.
Right. Yeah, I actually like that part of the straight arrow girl getting out of the car, like this lowrider car, and the boyfriend sitting there like, this is the element you're with now, and it's like, she just gives him this withering look, like, what do you mean element? You know, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, she thankfully, that's one thing I'll say is that yeah, they're a little thinly written, the female characters, not as bad as they could have been, but like
Right.
one thing I will say is that they did seem to call out the jerkiness of the bully relatively quickly,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
refreshing as well. Because it
Mhm.
usually takes them until the very end to get over that, but it proceeded in a way that was a bit more believable in terms of the pacing of it. Like it wasn't all at once, one way or the other. It was a gradual process, but it proceeded in a way that you could say, yeah, I could see that, and I could see why they might, like a caveman, because like, yeah, he's more primitive and more like, I guess you could say classically assertive in some ways, but also not in other ways because he doesn't fight back at first because he's just more. I'm sure that he probably could have fucking torn him in half if he
Yeah.
wanted.
Oh yeah.
If he wanted, he just seemed more dazed than anything because he was like, well, people are being really nice to me, and then there's this guy who just hits me,
And
but
then-
like,
More like surprised. I think that
And you had those people
that
that
is
came
my
up and
favorite
like,
scene.
man, you took a hit from him, man.
yeah.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing is he took that hit and
Mhm.
he acted as if it was nothing, and then just ignored the guy, and that was impressive to everybody else. Like this is the first
Mhm.
time somebody's actually stood up to this dude, and that's just and I agree that's something you look at and enjoy. And as far as she's concerned, I understand why she didn't go for the main character at first because he comes on like this obsessed
Sex
creep
great.
or-
well, yeah.
Yeah.
he comes out with that picture of them taking a bath together as children. I mean, I can't imagine why they didn't just
many
turn her
people
on
have
at the
seen this
moment.
Oh man, how many people have you shown this? Nobody, just you. Oh, here, I'll take it. And it's like, okay, only you can show people. I get. It's all right. That's your copy. It's like,
Yeah.
copy? he's so hopeless. I think that overall is kind of my favorite. Is kind of my favorite scene.
Yeah.
Which has already been almost fully described, but like they're the first time they're invited to kind of hang out with the cool kids,
Mhm.
and everybody is just totally into the caveman and just sort of ignores them.
Mhm.
And
like
then when I know his name is Matt, but I keep trying to call him Brad because he looks like a Brad. When he hits the caveman
Mhm.
and he's just like surprised, he's like, huh? And it's
And then
like, oh shit! Like I kept expecting him to like, pick the guy up and like throw him through a wall, but
Mhm.
And the dude
different
in
thing.
the bleachers are like, dude, he just took it.
Yeah.
Right.
which
Alright.
really gave them more respect for him because he was able to
Yeah, and the
stand
next day at school, they're like, "Whoa, man, that was awesome." And then I think I'll probably tie it. I think I'll give it a tie with the museum scene and just how poignant that was too. So because this had a lot of about as good moments in it, so it was hard for me to pick a favorite. But I think I'll do a tie between the skating rink and the museum.
Okay. As far as music goes, I really liked the bath scene with them. Even though I know it was I'm too sexy.
Yeah, this was an MTV movie. This was an MTV movie with a lot of like really
National Lampoon moments.
well. There were a lot of good songs, that I can't name, but they all felt like perfect for each moment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Anyone else about the soundtrack to the film?
Oh, I mean, classic, man. The classic early '90s. That's all you
Mhm.
need from. But that's any film like this. That's Wayne's. Well, not Wayne's World. That's in its own bracket.
Well, the
That's like
composer to this movie
that's
also
Bill and
composed.
Ted. That's I mean, that's Weekend at Bernie's. That's these type of films in a nutshell. It's the film. It's the music of the times, and it rocks in general.
Holy shit!
Mhm.
The composer of this film was J. Peter Robinson, and he did the music behind Cocktail, Wayne's World, The World's Fastest Indian, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Uh,
Wow.
it was he did the music to Erie, Indiana, The One Years.
That was good too.
Oh, Kindred the Embraced. Some of the Tales from the Crypt episodes.
The unfortunate abomination that was Generation X.
Some of
yeah.
the newer Outer Limits episodes.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, definitely
Okay.
cool.
Actually, when will Generation X get a
Oh, I don't know.
DVD release?
Do we want to see this? I don't know.
I want to see it because, but I never got to.
You didn't miss anything.
I think I'm starting to die here, guys.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Close to
think
the
so.
end.
Time.
Have we covered everything?
I think so.
Well, we've covered the major points because there's a lot you could talk about in this movie.
Right.
'Cause there's just so much fun stuff here, and it really is a time capsule.
Mhm.
So if you want something wild that'll remind you of a time that kind of never was, then Encino Man should be your jam.
Definitely.
Makes
Alrighty.
me feel old.
Yeah.
Let us talk to the original Encino Man. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you
Yeah,
Well, I'm
1996
Septim-
Ice Man.
I'm Septum Sen versus the World. We're a physical media channel. We like to do pickup. We do release news. We keep adding on to it because it seems Amazon is starting to move farther and farther away from physical media, as is
Yeah.
everybody else, which is a sad thing.
It
But
is.
we are still trying to get those new releases out, and of course we do weekly vlogcasts. And one of our new segments is debuting next week on the 29th. We are doing monthly anime reviews. And this month,
Mhm.
on Monday the 29th, we are discussing the series Paranoia Agent. And of course,
Nice.
we will be doing that live at between 8 and 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, give or take how long it takes us to film our other two episodes. And it's going to be a fun thing, so I hope you all join us. Of course, I am also working with Inside Movies Galore to help schedule things. And we've got Superhero Summer coming out in July, and voting is already underway. All the polls are out. And the poll area that would be common to this group would be Delusions of Grandeur. So if you guys want to vote, you should go over to that and vote there, though there are polls in various other places as well. And but next week is the last of our kind of individualized weeks where we get on my birthday pick, because this discussion will be actually spot on my birthday, the 30th of June.
Neat.
And it will be a pre-show of Give My Regards to Broad Street, which is a good setup to the film for discussion Across the Universe, which at this point is my favorite film.
Across the Universe. Yeah, that's a good movie.
It is indeed.
Oh, I definitely think so.
Never heard of it, honestly.
Oh, I saw it back.
then you have to watch it.
I saw it back
Yeah, I
when it
do.
first came out on DVD, and actually, I'll be honest, that was my. I mean, I had heard the Beatles one, when that came out in 2000, which is their 27 number one hits collection, and yeah, and I
did that.
Well, that was not only a good entree to the Beatles, but that was like the best selling album of the 2000s, which is pretty amazing. But
the
it's
Beatles
true.
were kind of cops, so I don't know.
Oh, but it's true though. But then when it came to like the deeper cuts, and especially like those albums, like my favorite album, the White Album, that didn't have any singles from it, which and a lot of songs from the White Album are in Across the Universe, which which makes me very happy because it's my favorite.
They even name drop songs that aren't in it. I think Maxwell Silverhammer gets a name drop. And it's like
they name drop quite a few of them, but the point is, like, that was a good entree for me to get into the Beatles catalog as a whole, particularly the songs that were not singles and are not as well known by people that don't really know the deep cuts. And I like the White Album the most specifically because it was so eclectic and it was so not a like normal singles driven album, even though there were songs that definitely could have been singles, but I just like that it was what it was and it had a little bit of everything.
Oh yes, it's going to be fun. It's one that's going to be tinged with my favorite film and a film that is almost as nostalgic for me as Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Matter of fact, out of those two, the two soundtracks for Give My Regards to Broad Street and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome made up a lot of my childhood. So it is going to be an interesting week, to be sure, as I turn 41, which of course I've already established that I'm old with this particular but not as old as Pauly Shore, who was 24 at the time that he did this movie.
Ouch. Oof, rough.
Yeah.
So he's like what, 80 now?
Let's see, he was 24 in 92. So I would like to think he's not quite that old.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
He's about 10 years older than I am, so that would probably put him in like his 50s right now. That's kind of sad.
That was a wild laugh there. Damn.
Jake.
Well, yeah, one need only look at like ages of people to really feel like how old.
Somebody cue Johnny Cash's Hurt.
Like Sean Astin was born 2 days after, like his birthday's 2 days after mine, but he's 10 years older than me. I didn't realize that. So he was already pretty old when this came out.
I've actually met him. He was at UWM campaigning for. He was part of the Get Out the Vote in 2016, and I met him and Will Wheaton at UWM.
Oh wow!
And he's actually kind of short. Like I think he's shorter than me. I think he's shorter than me.
Well, I mean, think about like what his
how tall
best
are
known
you?
roles arguably.
Like 5'10", 9-ish.
Oh well, I'm only 5'4", so you know.
Oh, you might be the same height.
If you
Okay.
think about what's probably his best known roles, I mean, Lord of the Rings, he plays a hobbit, and
I remember him from Stranger Things now.
I've never met him, unfortunately, but I met someone he played. We actually probably one of the earliest people I met who was like well known or whatever. But was of course his follow up. I think to this film maybe was the film Rudy, and the character he played, Rudy Rudiger, was doing like a tour of various schools and such. From what am I saying, inspirational speeches and whatnot. So I actually met the real Rudy Rudiger, but it was interesting that that's what I knew Sean Astin from before Lord of the Rings. I had not seen this. I had not seen Goonies. Strangely enough, I did not see Goonies until at least high school, if not later.
Same for me, really. I hardly remember what Goonies is even about.
Well, for my generation,
do Goonies
that's weird.
one day. That has to be a selection.
Yeah,
I really am starting to black out, so I'm just gonna go.
Okay.
Jake, it was your turn to go, so why don't you go ahead and knock it out for us?
As far as just our outro?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm Kotobuki Jake. I'm often on Symptoms In versus the World and on this channel in Delusions of Grandeur. I play in a lot of different sandboxes, and it's good times. And one of these days, I will get my editing software up and start contributing more. But first, I need time, and time. It'll be nice to have time. It'd be nice to have the kind of time I had when this movie came out.
Wouldn't we all like that?
Yes.
All right.
Anyway, I'm Dustin, also known as the Crypt of Horrors here on YouTube. I collect anything horror related and show it off on the channel with my pickup videos. I also have an Instagram, also called the Crypt of Horrors, where I'm not as active, but I post stuff there from time to time. I'm hoping to shoot some more videos a little later this week, so that's something to look forward to. And you can find me on Twitter at @DurCryptaxis, which I eventually want to just like shorten the name of my channels and stuff to Cryptaxis, because the Crypt of Horrors is quite a mouthful. And eventually I'm launching a solo horror podcast. So I'm going to quit trying to like guess when I'm going to be able to start it, though, because it'll be when all my other work is done, which is unending and eternal.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
Most appreciated.
Oh,
and definitely watch Crypt of Horrors. He puts some very cool stuff. I mean, I rarely see a lot of the vinyl and cool stuff that he puts up on his show.
Oh man, I have as soon as I'm working on getting like a new thing for my vinyl, and as soon as I do that, I'm going to do a vinyl collection tour.
Oh,
that's going to be freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's going to have to be multiple parts, I think, though, because I have kind of a lot. But I'm basically keeping them in like a cardboard box because I don't have anything better. So,
oh man, if I had some wall space, I'd get some like laser discs or some vinyl, get some that are signed, and just put them all over the wall. So artwork is amazing.
I have so many posters and prints. Like I don't have to worry about it. Anyway, good night, guys.
Night.
Good night.
And Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am Dane Kyle, aka Dane Damarung on YouTube, and I do a show called Blu-ray Views on a channel called Indie Horror Film Creative, and where I do a lot of unboxing of new Blu-rays and talk about them, because I lost so much of my Blu-ray collection some time ago, but I have built it back up bigger and better than ever, and I've taken people on the journey with me. And because it's important to me. If you're a filmmaker like I am, and you got to have a good film collection so that way you can become a better filmmaker. And I will be starting up a no money film school, but preferably when I can build up a dedicated editing PC that is up to snuff, because I don't think my laptop can really do it to the degree that I would like, at least not reliably. I could probably do it, but it would just be even more of a headache. And but anyway, yeah, I'm doing that. I'm really trying to get filmmaking started up again, which has been very difficult given coronavirus and everything. But yeah, so the Blu-ray channel that I'm working on, like that, or that I have been working on, is primarily where I'm at these days, but it is by no means what I am only going to do anymore.
Okay. And my name is David Struggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore, and we have had an awesome journey since we are talking about one of my favorite movies, or have talked about one of my favorite movies, which was Encino Man. So, but I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I do video pickups of my own, Blu-ray and DVDs. And I also do my own video reviews from time to time, although that's kind of been at a standstill because I've just got to find the time myself to sit down and record these bastards. So it's often a pain to find the time to do what you need to these days, and that's one thing that's hard to do. But I will plan on doing as many film reviews as I can in my lifetime. So, in any case, for coming along with us on this rambling journey, it was definitely nostalgic, and I'm definitely looking forward to your film discussions next week, Brandon. So.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
But in any case, like, share, and subscribe, and definitely follow us along. We are definitely not finished and not done. We are going to have a very cool month coming up with Superhero Month. Is that what we called it?
Sure, why not?
Superhero summer.
Superhero Summer. So I look forward to what the voters have in store for us. I'm sure it's not going to be as bad as the next presidency, but in any case, stay tuned for more exciting shit that we'll be talking about, and I hope you've enjoyed it. So thank you so much. Have a great evening or morning wherever you are, and thank you so much.
Nighty night.
Night all.
Good night.